Get the cash flow you need with an APP cash advance from CCGA. Pay expenses, make upgrades, perform maintenance, and more with interest-free and low-interest financing. Visit ccga.ca. Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advance Payments Program.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. And welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And also a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We had so much fun yesterday in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference. If you missed yesterday's show, highly encourage you to go back to the RealAg Radio podcast to listen to it. It's brought to you by Canada Beef. I learned a lot about the inner workings of producer checkoff dollars and the lanes of CCA and Canada Beef, and how there's each has a different responsibility, but at the same time, collaboratively working. And so I highly encourage you to check that out. If you've listened to the show for a long time, I'm a big proponent of we need to be more vocal in Canada about the use of checkoff dollars. A little bit, not make the assumption that, this was funded by checkoff dollars. I think we need to be more boisterous about it in terms of, hey, this happened because, and this is brought to you by because of checkoff dollars. So I think it's a very, very informative show and encourage you to go back and check it out. Now, enough about yesterday. How about today? We got a RealAg Issues panel from front to back on today's program. We're going to be hearing from Tyler McCann. He's the managing director at CAPI. We've also got Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner from RealAgriculture to break down some of the biggest issues of the week. This rail strike, it's over, then not over, and we got some breaking news that's happened. What a mess. And no matter where you sit with the union or the railway, I think you just want it to be over because there's such economic consequences that Canada's going to have to deal with the longer that this goes on. It is not a pretty situation. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the DNC convention as well as Canada and the U.S. politicians talking about price controls on food. Also something we'll break down to the full extent. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll bring in the RealAg Issues panel and get down to the debate right after this.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
Now time for a product spotlight. We're joined by Bryce Geisel, Canada Senior Agronomist with Koch Agronomic Services. What should farmers keep in mind about protecting their nitrogen this fall?
Fall-applied nitrogen is still at risk for losses by volatilization, denitrification, and leaching before and after winter sets in. So utilizing a proper inhibitor with a high rate of active ingredient can help keep that nitrogen around until spring. With a fall nitrogen application, we need to protect it not only until the soil freezes, but try to prevent losses after the snow melts in the spring as well.
So how do the products that Koch Agronomic Services measure up in active ingredients?
So Super U is the standard for dual inhibitors and has been proven over and over again by researchers. For any of those farms out there that may be using fall anhydrous ammonia, Centuro contains a new nitrification inhibitor that allows that application start before the soil cools enough to stop those microbes responsible for the nitrification of ammonia. And Anvil is a proven product to help reduce volatilization losses for farmers using operational efficiency of broadcast urea this fall. You can learn more about the products and find comparisons at defendyourend.ca.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues panel. We got lots to discuss, and we will try to do our best to break down the latest and greatest on what's happening with the rail strike. She ain't over till it's over, said Yogi Berra. And that is definitely the case in this situation, it seems. But I want to talk to you about FP Genetics first. FP Genetics Hybrid Fall Rye, innovative seed genetics for Canadian farmers. Contact your local FP territory manager to discuss your fall seed strategy and discover Hybrid Fall Rye's flexible end uses for marketing, milling, distilling, ethanol, and feed. Visit hybridfallrye.ca. Let's bring in the panel. Up first, Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Hey, Kelvin, how are you doing?
Doing well here, Shaun. The sun is shining. Things are drying up outside. Maybe we'll get rolling with harvest here again in the next day or two. Yeah,
you've been getting some showers?
Yeah, we had some rain on Thursday morning. Yeah, it was Thursday. My days are all mixed up here. It's all blurring together, but we've had a good week of harvest progress earlier in the week. So yeah, it was nice to the occasional rain to force you to catch up on things back at home isn't always bad at harvest.
Yeah, well, selfishly, rain shower this week in Altona has been good for the coverage of the rail strike. Just saying.
It's true. It's coincided well. Yeah, you're right.
Also joining us is Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, that was a happening place this week.
Well, sorta, and finally. I don't know. It was also a ghost town until it wasn't. So yeah it's been a heck of a week. And looking forward to getting into it here in the issues panel.
What do you think the biggest issue of the week was? Beyonce not singing at the DNC?
J-Lo and Ben Affleck split. I mean, that was a huge issue. Yeah, no, our lives have been completely consumed with this impending rail strike. And internally, a bit of frustration, certainly, on, the fact that we've been following this for how long and talking about the potential impacts, only to see it come to an absolute head. And then now we've got, government intervention. We still don't know where the ag minister is. And now we've got a strike notice going out. My head is spinning. I'll be honest.
If we were on AM Talk Radio, it would go something like, today we're going to discuss the big issues. You decide your calls. What's worse, the relationship between the Canadian Railways and the union, or Ben and J-Lo?
Yes.
Discuss.
Okay. No, thanks.
No,
I'd rather not. I'm glad that's not our show.
I love that video that's all over the internet of him opening the car door for her as she gets in, him shutting the door and walking around the back of the car and being like, my life sucks. Help me, somebody. Is there a greater power?
Just like the railway strike, everybody saw this coming. Anyway.
There's good memes for the railway strike as well. Okay,
true.
also joining us here, now we get to serious stuff. Tyler McCann, he's managing director at CAPI. Tyler, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Shaun. I think I look at the different internet than you do. I'm not sure about all of this J-Lo, Ben Affleck stuff, but I guess I'm missing out on the real issues that matter to real people, thinking just about rail strikes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've been spending more time on Instagram lately, and it's not good for productivity.
No.
Yeah.
Think we can get into kind of that cultural breakdown happening across the Western world because of those things, but maybe that's segment 4.
Yeah. I did get a call from a friend of mine who's not in agriculture, successful guy. He's like, why, what's the big deal about this rail strike? Like, why is everyone freaking out after one day? It's just like, okay, there's part of the problem right there. Kelvin, what is the latest as of us recording this?
Yeah, that's the thing. This situation is still quickly evolving, but the hopes of this coming to a quick resolution with the federal labor minister yesterday afternoon announcing that the government is stepping in and invoking Section 107 of the Canada Labor Code, the hopes that this would quickly come to a resolution, I think, are fading now because we have seen the strike or the labor stoppage continue on the CPKC network. They have maintained their picket lines. They say that the union is looking to challenge the constitutionality of the government's ruling here and whether it's infringing on workers' right to strike, which is something that the Supreme Court has ruled in the past, that workers have that right. And then on the CN side, it was looking more optimistic. CN workers were returning to work this morning. They cleaned up their signs and took down the picket lines as of last night. And at the same time, they're returning to work. CN ended the lockout, but they have now served 72-hour strike notice, as Lyndsey alluded to. And so as of Monday morning, August 26th, we could potentially have those CN workers back on the picket lines unless there's a deal reached before then. And this is a card that the union had played with CPKC. They had, with the CPKC shutdown, there was both a lockout and a strike notice served by both sides. With the CN rail network shutdown, CN had locked out the workers as they had the right to strike yesterday morning, but that strike notice wasn't served until now. And so this is the union playing one more card, one more piece of leverage as this goes to the Canada Industrial Relations Board, the Labour Board, for binding arbitration. And ultimately, I'm going to be probably surprised here if the courts aren't involved at some point to interpret what the law means here.
Well, and courts don't work fast, do they? Like,
no, that's the major concern as there's all this uncertainty regarding our economy right now.
Lyndsey, what I really took out of this week, I'm not surprised by it, but is the concern south of the border in terms of this strike? Like, in some ways, it might be getting more coverage. Like, it shows the integration of the two economies, product flow both ways, for sure. A lot of times we focus on exports going to the U.S., but I heard it from NCBA this week. NCGA, the corn growers, had a release that went out. I heard from Chip Flory. They were on crop tour this week. He was in Nebraska. Big discussion in Nebraska about the concern about this rail strike. It's getting some attention in the South.
You know, and as it should. I think perhaps for some of us, it's sort of like, see, it is important because America cares about it. Maybe some people will sort of pay attention, but you're right. You know, and what we've heard from our U.S. counterparts is that back and forth concern. So on one hand, you know, Canada is a huge trading partner, meaning we buy a lot from the U.S. So there is product that needs to get into Canada and move around Canada that would come from the U.S. But the U.S. also accesses several very important things from Canada that need to get down to the U.S. And then, of course, there's the other side. There's the protectionist angle, too. There certainly has been some concern on if goods can't move from port inward or move out to port, do we start seeing more product flow go south? And of course, that brings up some concerns for some who are thinking that's perhaps more of a inundation of Canadian product than they'd really like. So there are several facets to this. There's several angles to it. I think ultimately, I really did get the sense that, you know, the U.S. sort of, at least from what we heard, grasped the gravity of the situation very quickly, something that I think we have struggled to sort of feel here in Canada as far as actually wrapping our heads around just how impactful this strike is and will continue to be until it's fully resolved.
Tyler, so like, put your liberal strategy hat on for a second. Last week, Minister McKinnon said he would not go forward with Section 107. In less than 24 hours after the lockout happens, they go ahead. To me, like, did they change their minds, or do they feel there was value? They were building some sort of political equity by letting this happen? Like, why the strategy that they executed?
That's a difficult question to answer, Shaun, and I'm not sure. I've said a lot over the last 2 weeks that for anybody that talks about this being politically motivated, I don't think it is, because I don't get the politics on this. It doesn't seem to me that the pain and suffering and the widespread impact is worth it to kind of curry favor with a relatively small group of people. I think if you look at what the NDP has done over the last 24 hours, where they came out and opposed the government intervening, but as is often the case, didn't seem to actually be willing to do something about it. It speaks to there is relatively low political risk on the other side. And I actually think if you go back to the U.S. example, there's some really interesting things that we can learn with how they approach this. I mean, Joe Biden is widely seen as one of the most labor-friendly presidents maybe since the Second World War. And yet in 2022, he signed into law a mandatory deal to prevent a labor strike just before the holidays. And so if Joe Biden and the Democrats understand how you have to be careful how much you play into that labor, that union card, surely Trudeau and the Liberals can figure it out too.
So on that note, because I think that's a great comparison, I like to do these U.S.-Canada comparisons too. If Joe Biden can do it, why can we not hear a peep, a word, any sort of messaging out of the Conservative Party on this? You would never even know this issue existed. Why is that happening?
Well, so first, Shaun, the Conservative Party's not in government, right? That's one of the benefits of upsides of being in opposition, is that if you don't want to talk about an issue, you don't have to. I think that it is, I think every party is trying to grapple with, what does this relationship with labor look like today? How do you get to be a party that supports the workers without being seen to be, in the Conservative case, maybe too pro-union? I think that they're working through those issues. But, I suppose in their defense, it's not really necessarily up to them to comment. It's up to the government to take action. And so
that's the conservative strategist in you. But I'll read you John Ibbotson's column from the Globe and Mail today, where he says, this is a political black mark for the Liberals, who champion collective bargaining but repeatedly short-circuit the process, and it contributes to the impression that they don't know how to run the country. Okay? He continues, you would think Mr. Poilievre would be saying exactly that at the top of his lungs, but the Conservative leader has been conspicuously silent in recent days. There's a reason for that. Conservatives traditionally have limited patience for strikes that put the larger economy at risk, but Mr. Poilievre has been courting the union worker. I don't blame the workers who are voting for strikes right now, he said last year. Kelvin, this is not the Conservative Party that we remember when it comes to supporting unions.
No, like Tyler said, they're in opposition, so it's not that what they stand for right now is going to change the policy, but certainly I think this raises some flags and concerns as to what their priorities will be if they are in government, and how they balance the overall economic costs of this versus those votes. Again, it's puzzling how, as a country, both government and opposition, politicians in general, voters in general, how we have come to so poorly understand the economic damage, and how everything that we buy, sell, and make in Canada, I don't know what percentage, it's nearly everything, 90% moves by train at some point, or depends on inputs or outputs that go on tracks somewhere. So it's not like and this is something where I think the U.S.-Canada comparison, I wonder if there's a cultural thing too, where the U.S. Culturally understands the importance of business in the economy for funding its tax base and its government programs and all those types of things. And maybe in Canada we've taken that for granted. I'm not sure, but it feels like this is another example of where that weighting of priorities is skewed and off balance.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about, is there a long-term solution to this? Some farmers on social media have been suggesting that we need to renationalize the railways. Is that the solution, or are there others? We'll be right back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
FP Genetics relentlessly brings innovative new seed genetics to Canadian farms, ensuring growers, breeders, and farmers are supported and viable. Being a valued partner on your farm for decades, you can expect the continuous pursuit of the best genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's hybrid fall rye varieties and their end uses, or contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your fall seed strategy specific to your region.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains.
And we're back here on RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, myself, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture as well. The best answer for agronomically effective dual nitrogen protection? Well, it's a pretty easy answer. It is Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how this ready-to-use granular fertilizer protects nitrogen and boosts efficiency, visit kochag.ca, or you can also go to kochagronomicservices.com. Okay, we've been talking about the rail strike, and we're going to talk about some other issues as well here. But before we move on, I think it behooves us to think a little bit more longer term. This is going to sort itself out, hopefully sooner than later. But are there long-term solutions? We have a bit of a trend here where there's all these labor impasses in Canada, and farm groups will tell you they're very concerned that it's impacting our relationship with buyers around the world. Canada not looking like a dependable supplier. One of the suggestions from a railway perspective that's been mentioned on Twitter from some farmers in Western Canada, I might add, is to nationalize the railways. That the government would manage the railways more effectively than what's currently being done. Tyler, I know you've been thinking about long-term solutions. Was that on your bingo card?
No, absolutely not, Shaun. I think if you think about what the fundamental challenges that are here at the end of the day around, in this case, labor, but broadly about reliability and about service, I don't think putting government in charge of the railways fixes it. If farmers are concerned about their basis today, wait until you've got government operating the railways and see how much bigger that basis gets at the end of the day. There's going to be costs. It's going to be passed on to somebody and probably passed on to farmers. I think if you think about long-term solutions, and it isn't just to labor, we have reliability, we have infrastructure issues. They require a different approach. They require a more systemic approach, but they require us also to keep talking about this when there's more than just, or when there isn't an acute crisis that's staring us in the face. These chronic issues keep having an impact and dragging the sector down. And so I don't think it's about nationalizing the railways, but I think it is about a more concerted, more thoughtful, more strategic, more ongoing approach to saying, how do we get better service out of the transportation system in Canada?
If we're going to let the government run the railways, we might as well just have them market our grain for us too. That seems like a really good idea. Right, Kelvin? Oh, I love that. Oh, Lyndsey, I love that laugh. That was the uncomfortable.
We know what laugh that is. That is the uncomfortable.
That idea has been tried before, and we know that we've moved on and would like to. Yeah, I'm not sure anybody wants to go back to that, but or many people want to go back to that. But yeah, to me, the idea of nationalizing the railways, I can appreciate thinking outside the box and the need. There is need here to not move ahead with the status quo. We need some changes here, and that was one thing. The Labour Minister McKinnon yesterday in his press conference said the government will be examining why this is happening so often in railways and that type of thing. I'm not sure that it will lead to action. Perhaps if this drags out too long, maybe there will be a sense of urgency and a tipping point here in terms of actually having political will to actually implement some changes. But there's been talk about deeming grain movement essential as it is at the ports right now under federal legislation or regulation. There's also talk about need for longer collective bargaining agreements. That's one aspect of this. As these strikes have happened with CP Rail, it's now 9 out of the last 10 labor negotiations have required federal intervention. CN's record isn't quite as bad with the union, but we're still seeing stoppages there. And of course, you look to other sectors, critical infrastructure around trade, unionized workplaces at ports, airlines. We're seeing all kinds of places pressure right now with the threat of strike. And so I think this is something that there needs to be a real serious conversation. And again, status quo isn't okay here. One aspect here I think that should also be considered is perhaps having workers have more representation in these companies so that you have shared interests, that you don't have this vast where you have the opposite where the union right now, they're looking out for their workers and they have immense leverage and no real skin in the game or no real losses if the railway suffers here or if the Canadian economy suffers. That's where we have to figure out ways of maybe having more shared interest, whether that means having workers have shares in the company, that type of thing. I don't know.
They can, though. They have a pension, and then some of that pension is probably vested in the corporate stock. Like, go buy some shares.
But it's
maybe make it more obvious somehow so that the workers feel a stake in how the company performs.
Because realistically, that argument holds for, when we talk about banks, banks are not our friends. They're a service provider. You can invest in banks. Banks always make money. Go ahead and invest in them. And there is that certain component of, free will. But I think to Kelvin's point, it is a very us versus them mentality. There is no teamwork happening there at all. And that is, I think, one of the major issues that does need addressed, and not just for the railways, but for these labor issues that are coming up, that we have to be thinking bigger than just dealing with putting out each fire that keeps coming more and more often. Like, we are in chaos mode with these labor issues.
We are, but give me an example where in a union environment with a company, it is not an us versus them. That's the whole reason the union exists in the first place, is us versus them.
Yes, and realistically, we are in a position where that is just going to continually, if we don't have some sort of, let me back up a bit. One of the things that ticks me off about this whole thing, and I'm using much nicer language than I typically would, is that, like, if we were always going to go to binding arbitration anyway, why did we get to the point of a strike? Do
100%.
we actually, right? Do we actually have unions that can strike, or do we have industries that shouldn't be allowed to do so? Why do we let it get to the point where the entire system shuts down and then we do what we were going to do anyway? Because
we don't value the economy. We don't value what pays for tax.
Right.
100%,
So, like,
boy,
we need to back up a step and say, so realistically, what of our industries matter so much so that realistically yes, workers have rights, etc., but we can't shut down the entire economy or portions of the economy just because workers and employers can't agree. There has to be more work here. Tyler, go ahead.
So I spoke on behalf of the Liberals and Conservatives earlier. Let me speak on behalf of the NDP now.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
We have
so many hats today.
We have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We do have protections for workers. Mm-hmm. Workers have effectively guaranteed the right to strike. The Supreme Court, as Kelvin noted earlier, has enshrined that protection to them. The reality is a strike or a lockout can be a necessary evil and part of that tension. You need that relief valve in order to get better outcomes. So I don't think it's just about you've got to make all transportation infrastructure, all railways, essential services, but how do you give more tools so that both aren't going on strike at the same time, or that, if this does drag on and there's no process, there's an ability to intervene. Again, this was unprecedented. History of the country, we haven't had two railways go on strike at the same time. And so I think we need more tools that still give workers that ability to go to management and say, hey, look, we think that you're screwing us, or we need a better deal. And there is some very legitimate concerns that those unions are advancing at the end of the day. But we need the checks and balances to make sure that doesn't end up with catastrophic consequences for everyone else.
If John A. Macdonald did not have the vision for a national railway, we don't have a country. It is the economic underbelly of why we exist, okay? And that was true in the 1800s, and it's true today. We probably knew it better back then, but I don't think that fact has changed.
But the other fact that hasn't changed is we don't have an economy if we don't have workers, and we don't have workers that are motivated to do what they need to do. And so it is about finding that balance, because there is often an easy solution. This goes back to things like the temporary foreign worker program, right? If employers want more Canadians to work in those jobs, you know what they should do? They should probably pay people more.
But the data shows otherwise. See, in that example, it doesn't hold, Tyler, because the data shows otherwise. I could pay people double of what I'm paying them today. Can't find Canadians to do this work.
I think that there are situations, Shaun, where that's true. But heavens, if you look at kind of how that program has changed and evolved, where you've got people in Tim Hortons or in hotels that are coming in to do it, I'm not sure I agree that they couldn't find Canadians to do that work. But I think that the point stands that in the world today, and we talk about kind of these divides and divisions that exist, there is a divide and a division between workers and management. And we do need to make sure we've got right systems so that there is balance on both sides, and each side's got power at the end of the day. But I do think probably Lyndsey and Kelvin would both be happy to be paying double if that's what you're offering them.
So I'm going to retire then. No, just kidding.
We're on strike for the rest of the show.
Yeah, we're on strike.
This is your 2-minute strike notice.
Exactly. But I mean, and Kelvin brings up an important point though about, because we started this conversation talking about nationalizing this railway, which I would just put to anyone who suggests such a thing. When's the last time you saw the government run something better than you thought that you could? I mean, that just to me, I'm sorry, but putting it in government hands doesn't exactly instill confidence.
And teachers and public employees go on strike all the time too.
All the darn time. So there you go.
Not,
okay.
Yeah.
So there's that. But I think Kelvin mentioned workers feeling like they had skin in the game and that, that they had something to lose too, right? And that I think is part of this important conversation of recognizing that there's, yes, workers and management, let's say in a union environment, are often, opposing each other. But at the same time, I don't think that negates the possibility that you could still have a vision of you're a valued part of making this company work and workers feeling like they're part of something that provides value. And that, I think, is what is very much missing. And maybe that needs to be somewhat monetary. Maybe it's a complete cultural shift. But realistically, these are important things. And we recognize that. And I'm not saying you're ever going to eliminate the friction, but at the same time, there's, we do have to have people that actually feel like they're contributing and that they are valued.
Well, we're in segment 3, first sports analogy. You could have the best coach in the world that does the best job of bringing the team together and having a culture and all of those things. There's the corporate parallel, okay? And if you have one person in the room that is constantly telling the other players, this sucks. Coach is a crazy. We're not winning because of the coach. This is dumb. Makes us do this. This isn't fair. That's not fair. What do you think that happens to the culture? And this is the problem with this setup. And I don't know how you fix it, but that is the purpose of the union from a mentality standpoint. I don't know how you fix it. And because it needs to be fixed, because no Canadian, I don't care if you're the union side or the corporate side, this needs to be fixed. I don't care whose fault it is. Fix it. Somebody smarter than me, for sure. Okay, let's take a break. We've got more to talk about. We got a DNC convention. Beyonce didn't even show up. That is very disappointing. As well, I was also at the CBIT convention. We'll talk about that as well. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Apply anhydrous ammonia and protect your application earlier than normal this fall. Defend against potential losses and protect your bottom line with Centuro Nitrogen Stabilizer. Patented active ingredient pronitridine offers agronomically effective protection where it matters most, below ground. Easy to handle Centuro is also non-corrosive for fewer worries about downtime or equipment damage. Start early with Centuro as part of your nitrogen management plan. Contact your local retailer or visit centuro.ca for more information today. Doing more in the field is possible when you add the proven power of Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next generation dual-active urease inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. Driven by Duramide technology, Anvil gives growers the advantages of low application rate and long-lasting protection, all thanks to Duramide, a Koch-patented active ingredient. Defend against volatilization, boost efficiency, accomplish more. Learn all about the dual-active power of Anvil by visiting anvil.ca. That's ANVOL.ca.
Commercial breaks are a lot of fun around this place. Sometime we need to record what happens in the commercial break and put it maybe at the back end of the podcast. But very interesting. Okay, we are back here with the RealAg Issues Panel. Hey, field by field, Maizex is bringing Canadian seed to farmers across Canada. Maizex is your source for high-performance soybeans and grain, silage, and grazing corn hybrids. Visit Maizex.com to find your local Maizex representative. And Maizex is MAIZEX.com. Okay, our panel, Tyler McCann from CAPI, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, and myself, Shaun Haney from RealAgriculture. Let's dip into the DNC campaign. I think Canada watching very, very closely what the Democrat side of the aisle had to say last night. I tuned into, I would say, about overall half of the convention. Yeah, my nights are quite lively. And my wife said, is this not over yet? But here we are. And somebody that wasn't in attendance was Beyonce, that had everybody really disappointed. Tyler, what are your thoughts coming out of the convention for the Democrats this week as it applies to this presidential race we're 73 days away from?
Clearly, I think that we're in a world of contrasts today. And, kind of how you see those contrasts will depend on where you sit and your political perspectives. But what the Democrats offered over the last week, I think, stands in a pretty stark contrast to what the Republicans offered a couple of weeks ago. I think if you look at Harris today, that's a pretty stark contrast to where to where Trump is going, and the Americans have a choice, and it's going to be up to them to see 75 days, 76 days from now what choice they make. But it is pretty compelling TV for those of us that get to watch from a distance. But there's a lot riding on this, and hopefully Americans make that right choice at the end of the day.
I thought there were some great speakers. The one thing I will say about the Republican convention versus the Democrat convention, watching both of them, is the Democrat side of the aisle, there is some fantastic speakers. Hey, listen, I think Bill Clinton is one of the best political speakers of this whole, you want to call it generation. He doesn't have his fastball anymore. His voice is a little bit gone, but he can still captivate the room. And I think he spoke to the people that Harris needs to speak to if she is going to potentially win this, clear a message of happiness and joy. One of the criticisms, Charlie Cook of the Cook Political Report, very critical of hey, good speech, fine, no substance in terms of what the policies are. If you're going to attract those centrists, they want to know what they're voting for, and not necessarily being plugging their nose and worried about the boogeyman. We'll see if that changes here in the coming weeks. Kelvin, any takeaways from a Canadian trade? Of course, not mentioned any at all this week. But what's the Canadian impact of this week? Any thoughts?
Well, I think we've seen Harris talking about food price caps and price gouging on the food side of things. So I think in many ways, from a trade and policy aspect of when it comes to agriculture, there's actually some similarities still. There are many contrasts, like Tyler alluded to right now, between the Republican and Democrat parties, and they're leaning into those contrasts as we near the election. But on the trade and populist policy, when it comes to how Made in America is treated and that type of thing, I think there's concerns from a Canadian perspective about that relationship with both countries, or with both parties, I mean. And then there is also, I know sometimes we lean too much into the personal connections. Tim Waltz, of course, being from Minnesota, has an appreciation of Canada and knows the relationship, and is friends with Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, and that type of thing. So there is some of those connections. I saw the Canadian ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, was at the DNC this week as well, hanging out, rubbing shoulders with some of the key players in the Democrat Party as well. So I think there's a lot of positioning happening right now ahead of USMCA review in terms of both the parties. But I don't know. I think on the trade side of things, that might be one of the aspects where both parties are less differentiated than other areas.
Well, here's what I heard. I heard something really concerning this week, okay, from a U.S. political staffer, is two concerns. One, Trump moves forward, gets elected, talks about this 10 to 20% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. That's a big concern for Canada. I also heard from that same person major concern about the Harris administration when it comes to USMCA, that they would be more likely to rip up the entire agreement because Trump negotiated with it. He negotiated it. It can't be good. We need to fix it. That's not good for Canada either. So I maybe we lose both ways, possibly, Lyndsey?
Yeah, or
go ahead.
Go ahead, Lyndsey.
Go ahead.
I was going to Yeah, go ahead, Kelvin.
If Trump's talking tariffs, meanwhile, we've seen the Biden administration implement the Inflation Reduction Act, which has heavily subsidized and hurt the competitiveness of Canadian players and processors' investment in Canada. And so it's the same kind of pain, but inflicted in different ways. Yeah. So that's, I think, the choice right now in terms of what we're seeing on the trade policy front. Go ahead, Lyndsey.
Lyndsey, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm in line with Kelvin, is that realistically, there's perhaps, other aspects of platforms that we'll get to see in these next 70 plus days regarding the economy, et cetera, where they differentiate themselves. But it really does feel, unfortunately, like neither has a agriculture platform, at least anyway, that is terribly Canada friendly. So that it'll just be, what we end up with as far as having to navigate. And Shaun, you were at CPIC this week, also no Beyonce there. I just want to point that out. That's very important. But, the cattle industry is going to be one of those that, looking at these platforms, I mean, this is an incredibly important relationship, and it is an incredibly important time, regardless of who ends up in the White House. There will be challenges specifically for our export-dependent industries and our integrated industries, like our cattle and our hog industries as well.
Well, if we don't get the railways back working, we won't have to worry about any of it. Tyler, were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, so I think that we have to, as Canadians, move past this idea that, the Americans like us, we're an important neighbor. We've got premiers that are good friends with the VP candidate, and understand that at the end of the day, Canadian interests aren't American interests. And it is, I think, pretty reasonable to expect that there is going to be friction and there is going to be misalignment, to be a lot more clear-eyed about what we need to be doing to defend Canada's interests in the United States and around the world. And it can't just be a matter of, us going out again and reminding them how much of their goods we import, or how much, exports from Canada play into their economy. It needs to be about what are our strategic interests, where are they the same and where are they different? And it needs to be a lot more aggressive and doing more than just, a Team Canada approach where we've got ministers visiting the United States. And it needs to be about investing and acting in ways that underscore how important Canada is to the world. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening these days.
I disagree. I don't think, I agree that the Team Canada approach is not enough, but I don't think this government currently in Canada recognizes enough the significance and the importance of the relationship with the Americans. My God, we completely outsourced our military to them. And we're happy about it because, oh my goodness, heaven forbid if Canada has a strong military, because that just wouldn't fit into the liberal narrative. I don't think we look down our nose in their environmental policy. I'm not sure we recognize the relationship enough, Tyler.
So I think that's right, but I think that's because it's a lot more complicated than we like to make it out to be. And it almost goes back to the same thing on the rail piece where we want to find the easy, simple solutions that don't actually involve us having to do anything tough in this world. And there are big differences and there are big consequences. One of the things that resonated with me listening to Harris speak last night was this talk about standing firm with Ukraine and NATO. And that may not be popular to some of the U.S. base, but it's significantly in Canada's interest to make sure that the U.S. is a strong supporter of a safe, secure world. And personally, I would much rather a U.S. president that wants to be allies with Zelensky than with Putin. And there are Canadian interests, but there are also Canadian consequences. We also need to be able to stand firm with our NATO allies and with Ukraine. And we also need to be investing because, to your point, we can't rely on the Americans to do it. And it's tough, but I think we fall into this trap of, the Democrats will be better because we've got these great personal relationships.
They're not better. We've been writing about that for 6 years. They are not better. It's just a different version of not great for the relationship.
And the solution comes not from trying to butter up to them, but from strong actions. I think it's often the same with China. The solutions improving Canada's relationship with Beijing happens from actions in Ottawa, not from actions in Beijing. And I think improving Canada's relationship with the U.S. happens from things that we do inside our own borders and not from anything that happens.
Yeah, but to use your analogy,
give an example, Tyler, in terms of a card that Canada could play in that case.
In the U.S. case, again, I think so. Invest in defense. I mean, this is the low hanging fruit.
But that's appeasing them. That's exactly doing the opposite of what you're saying.
I don't know.
I don't think so. Well, it's what they're asking us is. So sometimes it is about. I think that there's a difference between doing it because they're asking us to do it and Canada being a meaningful partner on the table. What we need to do is to take irritants like that off the table in Washington. And we shouldn't just do it because the Americans ask us to do it. We should do it because Canada should have a strong national interest around the world. But I think that's defense spending and increasing our defense spending is different than trying to go down and talk about the trade. And my point, Shaun, is that we like to take the easy way out where we just remind the Americans how important we are, how close our relationship is. I think what we actually need to do is act so that we don't have to remind them, so they just know and they just understand. And I think that's where the difference comes.
Hey, we need to leave some time for the end of the show, so we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to RealAg Radio. It's the RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann of Cappy, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, and Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture as well. And we'll be right back. Hey, right after this.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann of Cappy, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, and myself, Shaun Haney. Hey, protect your anhydrous ammonia. Provided you can get it, and the rail strike stops, but I'm confident, okay? But protect your anhydrous ammonia, and bottom line, even if temperatures hit 15 degrees or below, that's not too late to apply agronomically effective, non-corrosive Centuro nitrogen stabilizer. Learn more at centuro.ca. Okay, panel. I think, Tyler, you mentioned this, price caps or controlled pricing on things like groceries, and we've heard a lot about this in Canada. Even though the House Ag Committee did a whole study and there was no gouging, we're still talking about it. And that this disease has caught south of the border is candidate Harris. We can now call her after this week's convention. Candidate Harris has also been talking about this. Why? Like, have we not learned from history that caps are bad?
I think what we've learned lately is that people like simple solutions, and they're looking for simple solutions to really complicated issues. Whether it's the Competition Bureau study, the House of Commons study in Canada, any of the other kind of thorough investigations into these issues have shown these are complicated, convoluted issues. These are a whole bunch of pressures that have made food price inflation higher. This isn't price gouging, and there is no simple solution to it. And so I think what you saw with the Democrats, what you've seen with, I think Trump was supposed to do something on this. He did a press conference with a bunch of food in the background and then didn't actually say anything about any
Fruit Loops
in the background.
The famous
in the background.
Fruit.
But I think that you're going to see kind of these what amount to kind of empty rhetoric, because there is nothing that they can meaningfully do. The best thing that we can do is make sure our supply chains work better, keep taxes low, make it easier to do business, keep interest rates lower. I think sounds like Jerome Powell was saying some good things today
rates
in
are going
the U.S.
down. Yep.
The rates are going to go down. That all will do a lot more to keep food prices lower than some big commitment around price gouging.
Yeah, Kelvin, I looked up, it was last week, so I'm going from memory here, but I was looking at Albertsons. Their profit margin was like 1%. That doesn't sound like gouging to me, but yet we're still talking about it. Is it because it sells well with the public? Politically speaking, this is stuff that resonates. People want to hear it. It's confirmation bias.
Yeah, I think it is. As Tyler said, we want simple solutions. And of course, we're noticing the price of food multiple times a week as we're in the grocery store or restaurant. And so this is something that hits home, and it works for politicians are finding success in this messaging from a political perspective, not in actual execution or making a difference for what consumers or what voters are paying for groceries. But there's been, if you look at NDP leader Jagmeet Singh here in Canada, how many wins or high moments has he had in the last 2 or 3 years? Not many. But the one that I think a lot of people would stand out and say, hey, I saw him working on this file, is when he took on Galen Weston and when he took up a seat at the Ag Committee when the CEOs from the grocery stores came in. And that was one file where I think where you could say Jagmeet Singh has had success or at least he's had some time in the spotlight taking on that issue. And so I think that right there is why populism is popular right now, and simple solutions are good politics.
Lyndsey, what are you watching for next week?
Oh, goodness. Back to school deals. And so speaking of inflation and the price of everything, I will say, and that's somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's not, in that realistically, we have not solved this rail strike yet. We certainly saw some movement. We have things that are in motion, but we are not through this. And that is the one thing that we will, of course, be continuing to watch with CN, potentially CN workers going on strike on Monday. I think we're still, and please, everyone, go to RealAgriculture.com. Kelvin's done some great work. Shaun's done some great work, keeping everybody up to speed on what has happened and the legalities of what has to happen next, etc. So definitely we'll be watching that, because as much as, off the top we say, a rail strike isn't going to drastically increase the cost of goods, etc. Yeah, it will. That's just how supply and demand works. And if we don't have supply, we're going to see some major disruptions to potentially the access to certain products, certain businesses that may have to close, etc. So, yes, we will be watching that. But yeah, we are on what I call the actual new year, which is back to school and September, which is always an exciting time. I'm always very excited to get to my back to school sweater. So watching that for sure. And of course that September means, okay, so we'll have Parliament coming back. We'll have all these sorts of things of getting back into the swing of things. So one more week, everybody. And then everybody's back at their jobs, too. That's another thing. Can I just say, a lot of people leave in August, and it is frustrating working in media.
Also, it's the first weekend of college football. It's week 0.
Oh, gosh.
And maybe more importantly than that, Shaun, it's the Shovel Fair Labor Day weekend
it is
in Shovel,
Fair.
Quebec. So hopefully everybody in and around the Ottawa Valley stops by to see some of the great entertainment, rides, and agricultural exhibitions.
Yeah,
wow.
Shaw Vegas. That's what it gets
They don't
called.
call it that.
They do.
They do. You can find a shirt in town that's got Shaw Vegas.
Shaw
on.
Vegas on.
You should come out, Shaun. You'd fit right in.
There you go.
Lightning round here. I gotta ask you before we leave. We don't spend a lot of time on this, but Charles Adler is gonna be a senator. Quick take on that, Kelvin. He was a conservative radio show host. Wouldn't call him that now. He was very anti Andrew Scheer. He exceptionally doesn't like Pierre Poilievre. Is this a bit of a passive poke by the Prime Minister at the Conservatives, or what's going on here?
Quick answer: yes, I think it is. As he was known as a right-wing media commentator for many years, and now he's flipped in terms of having a more, I would say, progressive or socialist views on a lot of things. And so he'll be in the Senate if Poilievre becomes Prime Minister. There's, what is it now, Tyler? 84 senators, I think, are appointed by Trudeau. So that's going to be something to definitely watch if we have a Conservative government in the future, the conflict with the Senate.
I will say this about the Senate. Only people in Ottawa that are talking about the rail strike, really, like Senator Robinson.
Yep.
Senator Black.
Senator Black. So
probably
the Senate's where the action happens now.
Apparently. Not voted in, but still actually keeping tabs on things and calling attention. So thank you, Senators Robinson and Black, for actually saying something. We appreciate it.
Well, we do appreciate it. Okay, gang, that's all the time we have here for today. Tyler, have yourself a great weekend at your fair.
Great. Thank you, Shaun.
Or what'd you call it?
Shaw Vegas.
Shaw Vegas.
Shaw Vegas.
It's next weekend. Labor Day.
Sorry. So you'll be
looking ahead. Yeah.
Kelvin, enjoy yourself, and hopefully the sun shines.
Thank you. Take care, all. Stay safe.
And Lyndsey, take care of those sheep, okay?
I shall.
Okay. Hey, if you have any feedback on today's show, like you disagree with Tyler, you agree with me, send me an email. You could send it whatever opinion you have. I'm just joking. Haney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg feedback line 855-776-6147. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will be back again next week. Cheers, everybody.
Get flexible farm financing with an APP cash advance from CCGA. Save on interest costs and sell when the time and price are best for you. Visit ccga.ca to learn more. Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advanced Payments Program.